I think it's important for us to realize that former President Trump will do whatever he thinks he can do he'll try to steal the election. I think that he's been very clear about that. He's been very clear about, the election is only going to be legitimate in his mind if he wins. We hear him say it repeatedly, and of course, we saw him put in place a multi-part plan to steal the election and to seize power last time. So we know what he wants to do. We know where he's headed. I think it's crucially important that those of us around this country, and we are the majority, regardless of what party you belong to, and if you belong to no party, who believe in fundamentally the peaceful transfer of power, who believe in our democratic processes, that we recognize that the margin of victory at the polls this November has got to be as large as possible, in my view, for Vice President Harris, so that, in fact, we have, as many protections as we can against the kinds of things we know Donald Trump and his allies will be attempting to do to steal the election.
Are the guardrails in place at this point to prevent things that happened last time, from the plans to the violence that we saw in Washington?
Look, I think we have to be vigilant. I think that certainly, across the board, from the state and local level up to, the federal level, people are very focused, paying attention to the kinds of things that have to be safeguarded. So there certainly are guardrails in place, but I think it's important for the American people to recognize that it doesn't matter how effective your guardrails are if you don't elect people of good character. And ultimately, if you elect candidates who are willing to blow through those guardrails, then that really does put the republic at risk. And in particular, when you're talking about the presidency, which is, of course, the most powerful office in the land, it's crucially important to our survival as a republic that we elect somebody of good character, somebody who is not going to attempt to torch the Constitution, which unfortunately is what we saw Donald Trump do after the last election.
And you presented the evidence, but how deeply do you feel it's resonating when we're many years out now from the Select Committee's work, a couple of years out, and public memory can be very short, and there are still so many people who believe that the election was stolen? How do you assess the legacy of the Select Committee's work?
Well, look, I'm very proud of the work of the Select Committee. I think that there was no way that you could have that kind of an assault on the Capitol, that you could have a president of the United States mobilize a mob and then send them to attack the Capitol to try to stop a constitutional process of the counting of electoral votes. There's no way that could have happened and we would have failed to investigate it. I think that would have been indefensible. And I'm very proud of the work that the Select Committee did. We, of course, were able to present a lot of evidence to the American people and to show the evidence through the voices of the people who know Donald Trump best. It's not his political opponents who tell the details of what he was doing when he refused to tell the mob to stop during the 3 hours that he knew the attack was happening, and he was in fact watching it on television. And he refused again and again to tell the mob to go home. We know that because of the testimony of those closest to him. And of course now the special counsel has been able to gather even more evidence. And I think it's really important that the American people see all of that evidence as well. I think that it's unfortunate that trial was delayed, in large part because the Supreme Court delayed the immunity ruling. But I think it's important that the American people see the evidence and that the American people know it's Donald Trump who's trying to suppress that evidence. He doesn't want people to hear what Vice President Pence said. He doesn't want people to hear other testimony before the grand jury. He's got all that testimony, but he doesn't want the rest of us to see it because he knows how damaging it is to him.
Going back to the Supreme Court, how do you reconcile the trajectory of the court in this moment, especially as it relates to the investigations against Donald Trump?
I think that it is really unfortunate that the court delayed as long as they did in ruling on the immunity case. We're in a situation as a nation where we had a sitting president who attempted to overturn an election. As we learned through our investigation in the Select Committee, oversaw a multi-part plan to do that. And we're now just about a month away from the next election, and he still has not been held accountable. Our system of justice should have worked more quickly, and in my view, the Supreme Court should not have delayed as long as they did.
Are they delaying because they're trying to protect the president?
I don't want to make that accusation, but I think that it was irresponsible for them to delay as long as they did. And I also think the ruling itself is very flawed. And no matter what the justices in the majority in that ruling believed they were doing, what Donald Trump believes they were doing is creating a situation where he, if he were to be reelected, would be absolutely immune from prosecution for anything that he does in office. That's certainly what he thinks. And that makes him even more dangerous than he was before that ruling.
Staying with the court for a moment and the court's decision on Roe, how you're a pro-life person, have always been. How do you reconcile that decision and the consequences throughout the country?
Yeah, I think the consequences have been devastating. And I think that anyone looking at those consequences, man or woman, whether you pro-life or pro-choice, the fact that we're now in a situation where there are certain states where women are being denied the most basic and most fundamental medical care because doctors aren't sure whether or not they'll face criminal liability, that's just not that's not a defensible situation. I think something has to change, and I think it's wrong that we've now had state legislatures in a number of instances impose really draconian laws, including in some states, in Texas, for example, the Attorney General is now bringing suit to attempt to get access to women's medical records. And I think, all of us, again, that shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's a very difficult personal issue, but what we've seen happen as a result of the overturning of Roe, in my mind, shouldn't stand.
Well, how has this become a partisan issue? And I'm sure there will be many people who will listen or watch this and think, well, with her conservative values, I'm surprised to hear her say that.
Look, I think that I think it's really important for people who are in elected office or people who care about the future of the country to engage in these issues in a way that is sincere, in a way that's truthful, to recognize the complexity and the pain and the difficulty of a number of these issues. But across the board, I really think one of the lessons that we need to take from the last 3 years is we have to walk away from reflexive partisanship. And we have to recognize that we need to be able to discuss issues and debate them and hopefully come to agreement where we can in a way that is serious and sincere and adult and not just kind of reflexively partisan.
I read your book, and I wonder if you thought about the psychology of what happened with you and your Republican colleagues, that there were really only two of you willing to serve on the Select Committee, two of you standing up, the other being, of course, Adam Kinzinger, for your values. What happened to everyone else? How are you the only two?
Yeah, I mean, it was, in some ways, it was a gradual development. If you go back and you look at what nearly every single Republican was saying in the immediate aftermath of the attack, everyone was very clear, for the most part, almost everyone, that Donald Trump, had engaged in behavior that was absolutely unacceptable and that he had to be held accountable. And that it began to change. One of the big things that changed it was when Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader, found himself unable to raise money because so many corporations around the country said, we aren't going to support Republicans anymore because you all voted to object, essentially, after this violent assault on the Capitol. And because he couldn't raise money in any other way, he basically went and begged and pleaded with Donald Trump for access to his lists of donors. And that brought Donald Trump back into the fold, and that happened before the end of January. So once it was clear that the leaders, the elected leaders in the party, were not going to stand up, were not going to be strong and firm, then I think that it created a situation where you had many, many others who sort of decided to go along. I think the psychology of what's happened in the Republican Party will be studied for years, but it really has been, it's been completely corrupted. It's not a party based on policy. It's not a party anymore based on substance or conservatism, certainly. It's been corrupted by Donald Trump.
And does so much of this really just come down to livelihood, securing your job?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a kind of a phenomenon that we have seen around the world in other instances. Donald Trump is attempting to use the tools that authoritarians everywhere have used, and we know that authoritarians can never do this on their own. They need collaborators. They need people who are willing to be complicit in what they're attempting. And sadly, there was no shortage of elected officials who were willing to play that role, whether it was, to protect their own political future or to, avoid the discomfort of standing up and speaking out. But again, I think it should teach all of us about the kind of people we need to be sure we're electing in the future.
Or the decisions we make. So
Yeah.
you and your father have announced your support for Kamala Harris in this next election cycle. For lack of a better term, is that a big deal for you to have to do, not have to do it, but to do it?
Look, I think if you had said 3 or 4 years ago that, you were going to have, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney supporting Kamala Harris for president, people would have said that. How did we get to that place? But I have to tell you, for me, when you look at the choice between these two candidates, there is no choice. There's only one responsible, serious adult running for president right now, and that is certainly not Donald Trump. And Vice President Harris and I might disagree on issues. Certainly there are some we disagree on, but I am absolutely honored and proud to be supporting her. And I know that she wants what's best for our country, and I know that she will work hard to do what's right for this country. And I also know that she recognizes this broad coalition that's come together to support her is a reminder of how important it is for her to be a president for all Americans. And so it was not a hard choice at all, and I'm very proud to be supporting her.
As you've been through this process, this exercise, have you come to a greater understanding of what it means to come together for bipartisanship? And I guess this is between both this announcement of this endorsement and working with your Democratic colleagues on the House Select Committee, that maybe all along you had more ground, or is that something you had seen all along?
No, I think certainly, anyone who serves in the House of Representatives, it can become very easy to sort of take reflexive partisan positions. That's how the whole system of the House is really set up. And when I look back, though, on my time in the House, very often the people that I ended up with the most respect for, even before the Select Committee, were members who served with me, for example, on the Armed Services Committee, a number of women who were veterans, who we might have disagreements, but I knew I could sit down and say, okay, walk me through how you got to your position. Let me walk you through how I got to mine. What can I learn from you? What can you learn from me? People that I know are serious public servants, and I can't say enough how critical it is that we elect those kinds of people.
Do you think we can do this as an American people?
I have no doubt. I think that if people are willing to certainly turn out to vote, get your neighbors out to vote, recognize that if we don't participate, we won't be able to do it. But
people won't even participate in Thanksgiving dinners when they know that people are on the opposite side of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to do a better job at listening to each other. But I also think that being involved and engaged in our political process, making sure you get out to vote, not taking your vote for granted, knowing how close this one could be and how important it is, I have no doubt that at the end of the day, good will prevail here.
You just spoke a moment ago about Vice President Harris recognizing the value of her coalition right now. That could include what one of our neighbors here in Boston, Doris Kearns Goodwin, wrote about, team of rivals bringing bipartisan effort together in a cabinet. Would you join the Kamala Harris cabinet should that scenario play out?
I'm completely focused on the election, on making sure that turns out the right way. And I think as a nation, we have a huge range of very complicated issues we've got to tackle and challenges that we have to meet. And so again, I'm focused on November 5th, and then after that, I actually have one child still at home, hasn't gone to college yet. So after we get through the election, I'm going to hopefully be able to spend my time with him in his last year at home before he leaves.
Well, that's scenario A and B, cabinet child. You also recently mentioned the possibility of a new party carrying the identities of the Republican Party that people knew very well until a few years ago. Is
Yeah.
that something that you're actively developing?
Look, I think it's really important for our country that we, particularly if you look at, the set of issues around national security, for example, that we have a party that is going to be out there making the case for a strong national defense, for American leadership in the world, for limited government, low taxes, the things the Republicans used to stand for. But the Republican Party of today has walked away from those policies and from the Constitution. So I'm skeptical that the party will be able to simply rebuild itself after this November, but I think it's going to be very important that there be some entity there that represents and reflects a group of people who really want to move forward to the future, and I hope to be involved in that.
Liz Cheney, thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.